Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to those of you who are joining us from across the world today for another edition of Pandemic Punditry, brought to you by the Content Experience Company. We are delighted and truly honored to have with us Dr. Stephen Fitch, founder and CEO of Eden Reforestation Projects, with us today. His organization has planted over 1 billion trees in 8 countries in 228 projects. That number may be higher than I know, but Eden Projects employ to plant methodology helps local communities gain steady employment so that people living in extreme poverty can begin to afford daily necessities such as food, shelter, clothing, and medicine, thereby establishing a sustainable relationship between the land and people. So we're excited to talk to Dr. Fitch today. Welcome to Pandemic Punditry, Steve.
Well, thank you. And call me Steve.
I will. Okay. So we'll get rid of all the formalities and talk to each other as with first name basis. That's always refreshing. So, Steve, for the benefits of our audience, can you provide some context, maybe some facts and figures if you have them handy, about the sheer magnitude of the problem that you and your organization is working so diligently to resolve?
Sure. I think everyone is aware that globally, over the course of roughly the last 100 years, somewhere between 80 and well, in the impoverished nations, up to 80% of the forest in many of those nations have been destroyed, cut down. Many nations are even higher than 80%. Ethiopia, for instance, where we started, was closer to 97%. The Philippine Islands, where I grew up, 96, 97%. So it's truly disastrous in especially the tropical belt nations. Yeah. I'm not hearing you.
When we were doing the research for this program, it was, when we hear the word deforestation, the first thing I think people commonly associate is the Amazon, right? The lungs of the planet, and that's the sort of the first visual people get. Oh my, all these forests that are burning in the Amazon. And while that's obviously a major issue, and from what you describe, especially these tropical forest areas, that's not the only part of the planet, right, that's severely compromised. So how do you pick like where to go and fix problems? Do the problems come to you, or people call you, or you find them? I'm just interested to find out how you sort of came up with these 228 plus projects to lend your hand.
Well, yeah, people ask that on a fairly consistent basis, and I say finding areas of deforestation is about as difficult as finding sand on the beach. It's just not difficult. Our model, though, since it starts with caring for impoverished people by providing employment to them, we have to build the relationships and develop key leaders. And so most of the time our project sites historically were associated with where do we have reliable personnel? Where do we have proven, gifted leaders who will, first of all, handle the money properly, treat the people properly. And those are key ingredients, because there's no shortage of places to work. There is a shortage of reliable leadership and committed workforce at times. So that's where we start.
So the people, that these committed, talented individuals that you have, these are people that are local to the region that you've sort of
Yes.
worked with over a period of time, and maybe have trained and groomed and in particular how to do this at some scale, I'm assuming.
Well, here's one of the interesting parts from people as they learn more about Eden. I did a TEDx talk some years ago at Reading University in the UK, and I said, people are amazed at the number of trees we plant, because we're now planting well over 20 million trees a month. And I said, but you got to understand, producing and growing trees is not the hardest part. In fact, did you know that trees have been growing by themselves for some time now. Um, and it's true. It's to make a science so complicated out of something that's been occurring naturally for billions of years is weird. The hard part is developing all the systems that are associated with um, training the people, getting the funds to them, doing the monitoring and evaluation to make sure that what we say or what they say they're doing is actually being accomplished. So it's almost like any business, if you will.
Mhm.
What's hard is the human side of the equation. Um, and yeah, that's what we've mastered, is how to put all of those systems together. And the byproduct, if you will, is growing trees.
So that's so brilliantly put. I mean, it's not something that you're. We sort of get lost up or caught up in the so-called science of this, but yes, trees do grow with very little assistance. I mean, all it has to do is a bird to poop in flight, and you
There you go.
potentially got a tree at the bottom of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, but I think the point, and I want to unpack that a little bit further. This employ to plant thing. I mean, why is that so critical for the success of what you do?
Well, I'll keep this part short. We started our work in Ethiopia,
Mhm.
and I was invited by President Haile Mariam of the Southern Peoples Region to take over a failed forest restoration project, a project that had been expertly led and fully funded by hundreds of thousands of euros. But at the end of 3 years, they had no surviving trees. And why? And the primary reason being, that group failed to understand even what the textbooks say is important, that humans are often the um, primary source of destruction of the local forest. But if you don't work well with them, you're never going to turn that pattern around. And so you have desperately poor people, and desperate people do desperate things. And so they were cutting down the forest. And this is the way I typically say it. You and I, if our children are starving and there's a tree that we can turn into charcoal, to give us another 1 or 2 days worth of food, we're going to cut that tree down and turn it into charcoal.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
really what we do is rather simple but profound. We provide the economic incentive to change, to stop being destroyers of forest and become producers of forest. And our commitment is to providing long-term employment. Um, and their job is really rather simple. They produce, plant, and protect native species trees. 90% are native species, 10% are agroforestry.
Okay.
Um, and it changes their lives and it changes the environment.
Brilliant. So, Steve, I know that 2020 was like a terrible year for us humans on this planet, right? It was, however, in retrospect, a great year for the planet because, I mean, everything from the canals of Venice having dolphins to, some of us being able to see the Himalayas through this, from the smog that cleared from the urban cities of India. The planet's had a pretty damn good year. What was 2020 like for the forest and in particular for your organization in the middle of this pandemic?
Well, it hit, I guess you'd say, the United States starting about this time last year, March. And our board of directors said, okay, you've got to prepare to cut the budget and scale back, and we've got to figure out how to survive, if you will. Instead of needing to scale back, we grew by over 200% last year, both financially and in terms of our trees planted. We planted nearly 200 million trees in 2020, and our funding grew from roughly 5 million to 19.4 million in just 1 year. And logistically, we were able to continue and we thrived. I mean, here I am in Rancho Cucamonga, California, and you're in Delhi, India, and really we were able to communicate without jumping on a jet, and we're able to get things done with key leaders who get things done with local leaders who send out the workforce, and we actually expanded dramatically. Um, kind of
I mean,
crazy.
that's amazing news, and I think. I mean, I'm sure the planet is more than grateful. I mean, it's amazing. One of the things that I think one of the observations, or maybe a general observation for most of humanity, was that if left alone, that the planet has an amazing capacity to sort of recuperate all its own, given all of the damage that we've done. Right. So it does
Yes.
bring this sort of existential idea that if we disappear, the planet's going to be pretty much fine. Eventually, all of this stuff will be reversed in due course, and we
Yes.
should sort of take that as a warning, I think, more than anything else.
If you look at Chernobyl, for instance, the area around Chernobyl, it's turned into a remarkably beautiful, mature, diverse forest, and that was accomplished by natural regeneration.
Yeah.
The problem is you can't, unless you nuke an area, you don't. Uh, and we don't want to do that.
Right.
You don't
Right.
end up with that kind of scenario replicating across the planet. So ally with the people.
With the people. Yeah. So I think, Steve, when we talk about planting over 500 million trees, and I think you're aiming at a 40 million per month, run rate of number of trees planted per month towards the latter part of this year. But if you just focused on that number, I think I believe that we're sort of shortchanging the impact that you have made on this planet, because the way I understand it is that once you provide a certain amount of terrestrial cover, nature takes over and then amplifies and magnifies the sort of breathing space that you generated for it, and in manifold regenerates the forest. So you might have planted just over 500 million trees right now, but that may have resulted in a much larger number of trees actually growing within those areas that you've operated. Am I correct?
You're absolutely correct. We're often asked, what is your survival rate? And my response is, after being involved in this for 16 years, it's not a relevant question, or
Yeah.
it's a misguided and inaccurate concept, because really assisted natural regeneration is the way forward. We don't just partner with the local people, you truly partner with and cooperate with nature. So the starting point is to provide um, a way to jumpstart the pioneer species, which are the trees that are the majority in any given forest, that they're more drought resistant, they grow faster, they just have biological evolutionary capacity to be the majority. But then once that canopy is established, then diversity kicks in. So the trees or the seeds and the roots that were already in the soil begin to regenerate, because there's shade, there's moisture, there's nutrients. And then, as you noted earlier, the birds start flying over and pooping out the seeds, and animals start returning. They have seeds in their fur or that sort of thing, and poop is our friend too. Um, so natural regeneration kicks in the studies that we've conducted, honestly, more informally. We need to get some good nerdy scientists out there. Um, but the more informal studies show that the net impact, once the canopy is established, is 150 to 250 to 300%. And it's amazing. It's and the diversity just goes nuts.
So
Maybe
the other thing
where
that
else?
so yeah, what the other thing I sort of observed by sort of listening to some of the conversations you had on your vlogs was that the assumption that all we have is trees take a very long time to grow, 20, 40, 50 years. I mean, this famous thing of plant a tree today and children will bear the fruits of it. I mean, we have this in sort of colloquial understanding of it. But what you've sort of demonstrated is as quickly as 6, 7, 8 years and under 10, you've sort of made this thing completely 180, almost different from what you took over. I mean, a barren, desolate, scorched earth sort of thing, becomes lush and green and with all kinds of things in there, and that's not really in a span of time. 7 to 10 years is not a very big, long length of time, and that's what
It is
amazed me.
not. I mean, different forests and different species grow at different rates.
Right, right,
One of the forest systems that I've been amazed at is right in the southeast corner of Nepal. Uh, Rajapur is where we planted early on,
okay,
and we're 5 years in to the project there, and it's right on the Indian border. I mean, it's 5 kilometers from India.
okay,
Bottom line is, 5 years ago when I first walked that land, it was barren landscape. Now there is massive forest there, and the trees are typically anywhere from 5 to 8, 9 meters tall. They're not truly mature,
right.
fully mature trees. Their diameters like this, but yeah, there's a very healthy canopy now. There's another system though that's really important. Um, there's a group of trees called coppice species, and what that means is, in essence, they regenerate. So if you cut down a, a coppice species, and they're common all over the planet, eucalyptus from Australia are a
Okay.
good example. You've got the stump, and all these shoots start coming up, and you end up with an ugly bush, eucalyptus bush. But if you do what's called singling, you cut all of the stems except one or two in the middle. Because of the healthy root system, it'll produce a canopy tree again in record time. Three,
Wow.
4 years, you've got a good system going, and that's called farmer managed natural regeneration. And we utilize that methodology quite a bit. You could also call it assisted natural regeneration. So
So,
there's ways that nature kicks in big time.
so Steve, is your doctorate in forestry, or is it on something else? I mean, how did you become, one so knowledgeable and sort of. I mean, I know that when you went back to the Philippines, where you were initially, started your life at, you saw all the devastation, and you said you got to do something about it. But what in your background helped that? I mean, did you study this stuff in college and then sort of apply it, or how did one become such a strong advocate and a brilliant one at that?
Well, my undergrad degree, my bachelor's is in business. My
Okay.
master's is in divinity, which and my doctorate is in theology. So I am immensely unqualified uh, to do this. Other than, I would just say this to anybody: this isn't rocket science. My son, my youngest son, is a nuclear engineer. That's
That's
hard.
rocket science.
Okay. Um, I'm intelligent, I think obviously, and I love to research. But if you're curious and you got your hands in the dirt, you can learn all of this stuff in record time. And frankly, I can teach you in a short amount of time. So curious, inquisitive, eager to learn, willing to experiment. There's no such thing as failure. You learn from your failures. Um, well, there is failure if you quit,
Yeah.
but no, it it just has come over time and through trial and error and getting at it.
You forgot one other thing. I think it's that you have to care, which obviously you do. Yeah.
I'm passionate, and I would say the Eden team is passionate about caring for the poor and the planet as a single cause.
So
Yeah.
so you've sort of found your calling then, in this thing where you're helping the planet, but you're also helping the people that depend on those forests to survive, and incentivize them to actually live off of it without cutting it down, right? So help all of us breathe properly, and the planet not go into extinction. So I think that's a
Yeah.
commendable objective.
Well, thank you. You said it well. I found my calling. Um, Coming from my background, frankly, overseeing a lot of churches was a big part of my career, and it was
Mhm.
miserable. Um, I am happy now. I am fulfilled, and know that perhaps this is exactly what I was destined for, and I'm excited to be involved in this effort.
Well, I
Yeah.
guess we have a gigantic cathedral now to operate in, called a forest.
Yeah. Well said. Well said.
So Steve, a lot of we've seen. I mean, I don't know whether you've seen the Netflix documentary "Kiss the Ground," which it was a fabulous documentary on soil regeneration and sequestering of carbon. This, a lot of people sort of, trying to deduce regenerative agriculture and permaculture back into sort of the sort of how we sort of harvest or create grains and eat it, right? So to change our agricultural practices so that we don't sort of release all this carbon that's trapped in our soil and in our forest. So do you consider I mean, what you're doing, obviously, creating the forest is a way to sort of sequester even more carbon, right? I mean, there is obviously a critical need to do that given the sort of extinction emergency that we're all facing, right? I mean, what do you find it sort of, having done this many trees, like, I think the observation is that we have a capacity to destroy, but it seems that we also have a tremendous capacity to restore if directed properly. Would you agree with that statement? And do you see yourself as a mission to sort of teach people how to restore the things that they have destroyed?
Absolutely. Let me go back to my training, my formal training. Um, every faith has some kind of written declaration that we must care for the planet. We must be responsible um, with what is there. And you go to the book of Genesis, and I'm going to keep this short.
That's
Very
fine.
early on, you could argue that the first commandment from Yahweh, God, was to care for the garden. And I just consider, I don't care if you're Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, we've got to get this right. We've got to start caring for the garden because um, it's a mess. We made it a mess, and we can hopefully collectively figure out ways to unmess it. how's that for how's that for good theology?
Brilliant. So we have a couple of questions coming in. This is from Vikram, who says, "Hey Steve, wonderful work. Have you planted Paulovina trees? I think I'm Paulovinia trees.
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't recognize species. We do our best to um, again to plant the pioneer species that are native to the particular site. So what we plant in Madagascar is radically different than what we plant in Kenya, radically different than Nepal and Indonesia, etc. But a very large percentage of our tree restoration work is mangrove, and we're working in mangrove estuaries worldwide.
Explain a little bit of why mangroves are so critical. I think I know the answer, but I would like you to share that with the audience. Why mangroves? What's so important about mangroves as opposed to, say, maybe a tree of
Well,
in the
all
interior.
systems are important, but mangroves are disproportionately important. Um, they are essential as carbon traps as a starting point. They sequester somewhere between 3 and 5 times more carbon than terrestrial systems. And it's, pardon me for doing it this way, they have those crazy root
Yeah, yeah.
systems, that capture all kinds of organic material, and through anaerobic activity they bury it in the mud. And so it's really not so much capturing of carbon through the roots and the trunk. It's capturing uh, or sequestering through soil sequestration. But then they're essential to ocean health. They are essential for turning salt water into fresh water. They're essential to storm mitigation.
Right.
Remember the tsunami back in, what,
Yes.
20 years ago?
Yes. Yeah.
Where there was mangroves,
No problem.
there was really no problem. Where the mangroves had been cut down, oh boy, was there a problem. So,
So yeah, that's something I hadn't known, that the sequestration was so high, and they're so turning salt water into fresh water, and of course they're also the nursery for the ocean, right? So all the juvenile fish and crawfish
yes,
and everything, shrimp and everything all grow in there, and that's where the ocean life sort of begins in these mangroves.
they say something like 70% of at least reef species have some aspect of their reproductive cycle taking place in those crazy root systems because it provides so much protection from predators. So when you destroy a mangrove estuary, you're actually destroying the coral reef system, and it all bounces out, and you begin to mess up the whole ocean.
Wow.
So, yeah, the leg bone's connected to the hip bone, so
Yeah,
it's all connected.
it's amazing how we go end up messing with this great design. You know what I mean? So, in wantonly, I mean, so for a shrimp farm, we sort of remove all these mangroves and put aquaculture to grow shrimp or
Right.
something like that. And God,
It's terrible.
economically speaking, that's just a waste of so many things. I mean,
Absolutely. The shrimp farms all over the world that are, byproducts of cutting down mangroves, they're so eventually so toxic and nasty.
nasty.
Uh,
Yeah.
don't eat that stuff.
Well, I'm a vegan, so I don't eat any animal products whatsoever.
Well,
So,
if you're not a vegan, don't eat that stuff.
yes, I agree. I agree. So, what in your sort of your research, uh, and Vikram, if you wanted to actually explain what the Paulovina trees are and where they're grown, then maybe Steve can sort of see whether he's encountered them. So, if Vikram, if you're still on, if you can clarify that question a little bit or tell us a little bit about these trees, it'll be great. So, Steve, in your experience, when you talk to the people that have cut these trees, right? So, are the people that are cutting the trees actually people that are, in the vicinity? Are they coming from outside? And why are they cutting these trees? Is it for firewood? Is it to sell? I mean, I know they're impoverished and they're hungry and they want to make some money, but is it to open up land for them to grow crops? Is it for livestock? What's behind most of this deforestation?
It just varies so much from site to site. My boyhood home, the Philippines, it was American, Japanese, Taiwanese lumber interests that came in and cut down the incredibly valuable mahogany, for instance, and strip mined the place. A lot of times it is for valuable hardwood, and they don't practice sustainable approaches, and they don't reforest. But then a lot of it is desperately poor people, and frankly, women who really want to take care of their children. So they'll cut. There's millions and millions of women who are cutting down 2, 3, or 4 trees every single week to turn it into charcoal. And charcoal has to be made from a live tree. And
Okay, I
so
didn't know that.
it otherwise it turns to ash. The moisture in a live tree, you bury those, you start a fire, you bury it in a sense, and it smolders and it turns into charcoal, which is the common fuel for cooking and heating in many developing world nations. And so, the motivation behind these individuals, it's not greed, it's survival. And then, it like we're starting to work in the Amazon now, and a lot of that is driven by cattle ranching,
Mhm.
and really destructive, wasteful practices. The Brazilian government has passed a law that they're required to replant 20%, but they've given them no capacity or recourse to accomplish that. So we're going to help do that.
Okay. So this is to sort of replant the or reforest the areas that have been destroyed in the Amazon.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay. Ritu wants to know, is there any one experience that stands out in terms of challenges that you faced? Any one particular experience?
absolutely. Um, this is always a little bit sensitive to discuss, but corruption is the number one enemy. Every just about every government or nation on the planet has some level of corruption, but many developing world nations are far more embedded in corruption than others. And I won't name the name, but I mean I've personally been arrested and sat in a hut. I call it my hut arrest, with a guy with an AK-47 because there were there was an indentured servanthood scheme that we inadvertently destroyed. We came in and gave this whole village a job and didn't know that the majority of the adult population were indentured servants. And what they did with their pay when we started paying them is they paid off their debt and they got out of slavery, if you will.
Right.
And so the guys who led this scheme um, didn't like us ruining their economic um, economic nightmare for everybody else. And bottom line is consistently corruption is the hardest part to mitigate. There's so much of it in many nations. That's not inappropriate for me to say, is it?
No,
Yeah.
you can pretty much say anything on this show. So, though, it's interesting. So when it sounds like that, in most of these places, you are on the ground almost in all of these projects at some point during its life cycle. Am I
Yes, sir.
assuming correctly?
In
Yeah.
the early years, and by the early years, I mean the first 12 years, I literally was the person to launch, find the leaders, develop systems, launch the efforts, but thankfully, as we've grown, we have wonderful leaders that are allowing us to scale rapidly. And it's not all about this old balding guy anymore. I'm greatly relieved. We got Jamie Schottenberg in Madagascar and with Josie and Pakaret just doing incredible work. And the Kinzers in Kenya, and the
Yeah.
list goes on and on of gifted leaders that have been multiplied now.
So, in terms of sort of resources and funding, I understand that corporates who want to do some carbon offsets, for example, may contact you to sort of do that, right? So if they're sort of killing the planet on one end, they can offset some of that by helping the planet on another end by contacting someone like you. And this is for any company globally who could do that if they wanted to
Yeah,
do that.
the carbon aspect is somewhat new.
Okay,
Historically, it was just corporate social responsibility.
possibility. Okay,
People, companies wanting to do the right thing.
right.
Um, and we've got we're closing in on 1,400 companies globally that are supporting Eden. Usually by, whatever they produce. If we produce a coffee cup, for every case of coffee cups, we'll donate to plant one tree. Um, and we've got literally thousands of are hundreds and hundreds of small companies that do this, and we've got about 50 large companies like, frankly, Amazon. Um, Jeff Bezos' Earth Fund has been incredibly generous. But then we have major donors. We have everyday folks that, want to make a difference. They give 10, 20, 50, $100 a month, whatever they can afford, and they know that that $10 turns into 100 trees every month.
$10, 100 trees.
That's another big part of our success. We are typically a 10 cents a tree organization.
Wow. Wow.
And people ask how so? And the answer is that's how much it costs.
Wow. 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 So Vikram's clarified. He says that these particular trees, the Paulavina vinia trees, are genetically engineered trees being planted in India, and they grow to a height of 6 meters within a year and 9 meters within 3 years. And so whether you had heard about them. So
yes, now that he's mentioned it, in fact, we do have some of those growing in Nepal. Obviously, I think they're a lower land species, so they're not a mountain species. But yeah, we do that.
he says the wood is the lightest in weight, yet the hardest and most waterproof in the world. So this particular genetically modified tree. So this would be the 10% of the trees if you were to plant them because they're the non-native component of your reforestation program.
Yeah, this would qualify as agro.
Agro, yeah, because they're probably for harvesting, right? For wood and firewood and things like that. I'm assuming. So have you? I know that millets are a grain that are sort of very drought resistant. They put a lot of nitrogen back in the soil. They conserve water. Is that something that you've seen especially in parts of Africa and other parts where you can use to sort of, because they grow on very sort of hardy soil, rocky soil. Is that some way you can sort of get some vegetation on the ground, cool down the earth while the bigger trees grow?
You definitely want to be planting nitrogen fixing species whenever possible, and thankfully there's a wide variety of legumes and other species that are nitrogen fixing.
Okay.
So
So that's something that you also do into the mix, is it? I mean, you want to reforest, but then you want to sort of feed these impoverished people by planting some food crops. Is that something that you plant separately from the forest, or because if this is like all destroyed barren land, I guess you can't really keep half of it for sort of crops and the other half for trees, right? Or can you? I don't know.
well, honestly, we're a learning community. So early on, we didn't really understand everything you're talking about. We're getting much better at it now. And so what you're describing is called permaculture. It's a combination of forestry, restoration, and agriculture. We're getting better at that. We still have much to learn. But then, side gardens or forest gardens, as some people call it,
Right.
are common. It really varies from culture to culture, nation to nation. We, I hope, again, this is not inappropriate, but I'm not the great white hope. I'm not there to fix and to tell people what to do. One of our keys of our success is we listen, and we do have our boundaries because we want to do this right, but a huge percentage of what is determined and how it's accomplished is up to the locals.
Okay.
They
So
know what's best.
yeah. So if people are sort of listening and say, oh, how can I contribute? One is obviously through your pocketbook. I mean, you could obviously donate sums of money. But if they were experts in say permaculture, or they were wondering how they could reforest an area that's being deforested in their part of the world, they could get in touch with you and sort of get that process going, or get a dialogue going, or get some know-how as to how they might start a reforestation project. Is that something you encourage people to do?
Yeah, I think if you go to info@edenprojects.org, that email address, um, and begin to engage and ask questions, or, how can I help? What about this idea? We can begin to respond. Um, we definitely, frankly, we want to be in India um, in 2022, in
Okay.
Bangladesh as well.
Okay.
Um, and we would especially like to work with the massive number of farmers, small plot farmers, and other opportunities. Um, again, going back to that tree that was mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
help understand it better. Um, you got a good idea? Help us. Yeah.
Okay, I'll let I'll forward the contact information to Vikram, and let's see whether he can provide some more information and maybe start a
Yeah.
dialogue with him. I think I know Vikram well enough. He is involved with lots of water projects, so he's a water guy. His
A
company
water
is.
guy.
He is a water guy. Yeah. So everything from making water from the air to regenerating sort of with bacteria, creating new water sources and all that. So he's an expert in that area. His family is as well. So
Well, if you're planting trees, you're a water guy, as
yeah,
long as they're the right trees.
right, right, right.
By the way,
So
agroforestry trees don't have to be natives, as
right,
long as they're not invasives.
as long as they're not dangerous. Okay. So I think you're answering Ritu's question there, but it's not a native species. But I think what you're trying to do is to essentially balance this need from for the indigenous or the local people that are there who have to sort of survive on the land, and also for them to maintain or be custodians of the forest, and not let that get destroyed. I think it's a fine line. And so, Steve, it's been a sort of a fabulous conversation. I have improved substantially my knowledge of ecology of the forest, and I've learned that from a divinity PhD. So I am grateful for you having taken the time to talk to our audience, and Godspeed to all the work that you're doing. I mean, the planet needs more people like you who are making an impact. And I think that's the need of the hour. If the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that with a virus that they supposedly say can fit in a can of Coke, all of this virus running around can cause this kind of economic and death around us. We better take that as a warning and really fix what we're doing to Mother Nature. So you're way ahead of that game compared to some of us who are getting enlightened as the pandemic comes about. But thank you for so much for the work you do on behalf of all of us. And I'm hoping that this will inspire some people to contribute and hopefully get involved and do some of their own reforestation activity in the neighborhoods that they live in.
Terrific. For that.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
speaking with you. Take care.
My privilege. Bye bye.
Bye.